They came out of nowhere. 1 minute, I was sipping coffee by the lake near my cabin, enjoying the quiet sounds of the forest. The next minute, a white SUV pulled up, and 3 people from the HOA stepped out like they owned the place. One of them carried a clipboard. Another had a walkie-talkie. The third, well, she just pointed at my cabin like it didn't belong to me. "You have 30 minutes to vacate," one of them said, flat and cold. At first, I thought it was a joke. I looked around, half smiling, expecting a camera crew to pop out of the woods and yell "gotcha," but there were no cameras. Just 3 very serious faces standing between me and my peaceful morning. This cabin wasn't some illegal shack I built in secret. It had been in my family for over 30 years. I'd spent summers fishing at the lake, winters repairing the deck, and every fall chopping firewood behind it. It was more than a cabin. It was mine. But now, the HOA claimed that the access road leading to my cabin was part of their private community land. They said that by using the road, I had violated their terms. I asked, "What terms?" They said I should have received notices in the mail. I hadn't. Then they said the notices had been taped to your fence. I checked. There was nothing there except an old delivery slip and some spiderwebs. They weren't backing down. I asked for proof. They said I could check their legal documents after I left. That's when I knew something was off. No court order. No sheriff. No lawyer present. Just a clipboard, a walkie-talkie, and 30 minutes ticking down. I stood still. My brain raced. Was this even legal? Could they really evict someone without a process, without warning, from their own private land? The strange part was, they weren't touching the cabin. They weren't stepping foot on the property itself. They just blocked the road. They told me if I didn't leave voluntarily, they'd have the road permanently gated and report me for trespassing. I asked them how I could trespass on my own land. They didn't answer. They didn't care about my questions. They just cared about control. And that's when it hit me, this wasn't about law. This wasn't about rules. This was about power. They thought I'd panic. That I'd pack up in a rush and vanish. That I'd leave the land I'd grown up on. But I don't scare that easy. After they drove off, I didn't pack. I didn't call a lawyer. I pulled out every paper I had, title deeds, maps, land surveys. I traced every border, every road, every right-of-way. I wanted to see exactly what they claimed was theirs. And that's when I found something they probably hoped I'd never notice. A strip of land, narrow but long, that connected their HOA property to the public road. It was listed in their name. But just beyond that strip, past a dry creek bed, was a small, undeveloped lot. It had no structures. No value on the surface. But its placement. Strategic. If I owned that land, I could build a new access road. A private entrance. A route they couldn't block. And better yet, if I owned both sides of their tiny road, I could completely cut off their only road access. It was like finding a hidden card in a rigged deck. That night, I didn't sleep. I called a friend in real estate. I asked him if the land next to the HOA strip was for sale. He said yes. It was listed weeks ago. No offers. Owners were motivated to sell. By sunrise, I had an offer ready. But I didn't stop there. I asked him to pull records on the entire surrounding area. Empty plots, undeveloped corners, failed sales. I wanted to know exactly how much land I could buy around that HOA road. I wasn't just going to save my cabin. I was going to surround their little kingdom and build something better. Something they couldn't block. Something they couldn't touch. Because the truth is, if someone pushes you off your land, you don't just push back. You push forward. The next morning, I drove into town with a mission. My first stop was the county recorder's office. I needed every piece of paper connected to that property line, to that HOA, and especially to that strip of road they thought they owned. I wasn't going to guess, I wanted facts. The woman behind the counter recognized the property name right away. She gave me a tight smile like she already knew the drama I was about to stir up. "You're not the first to ask about this place," she said. That got my attention. She printed out a thick stack of records easements, boundary surveys, and old development plans from years ago. And tucked right in the middle of all those papers was something I never expected, a road use agreement from 20 years back. It gave the original cabin owner, my father, the right to use that exact road. In fact, it said it was a *** permanent easement *** attached to the land itself. That meant it stayed in effect, no matter who owned the land now. They had no right to block me. Not legally, not morally, not in any way. But here's the kicker, they weren't just ignoring that document. It looked like they didn't even know it existed. Or maybe they hoped I didn't. I drove back, stopped at the edge of their precious little entrance road, and smiled for the first time since this all started. The power they thought they had. It was a house of cards. I called a lawyer, just to be sure. He looked over the easement, double-checked the parcel ID numbers, and said, "You've got them." He laughed. "They don't own your access. You've had legal rights for decades. They can't revoke it. Not unless you give it up, and even then, they'd need a court order." Still, I wasn't satisfied. I wanted more than just keeping the cabin. I wanted to make sure they never pulled something like this again. So I went forward with the land deal. The seller of the adjacent property was happy to get rid of it, said it had been on the market for nearly 2 years. Overgrown. Unused. "It's yours if you want it," he said. I made the offer that day. No games. Cash. Fast close. While the paperwork was processing, I took a walk across that newly purchased strip. I stood at the border of the HOA Land, looking down the hill at their clubhouse. It was fancy, brick walls, fake fountains, a tennis court with a cracked surface that probably hadn't been used in years. I didn't want their clubhouse. I didn't want their rules. But I wanted to send a message. I found another listing. A second piece of land, right behind their community garden. It was shaped like a wedge, small and strange, almost useless to anyone else. But to me, it was a chess move. That little wedge touched both the HOA fence line and a patch of open woodland I already owned. Once again, I made an offer. 2 plots, side by side, slowly boxing them in. I didn't tell them. Not yet. Let them think I was gone, defeated, evicted. But while they were patting themselves on the back for driving me out, I was planting flags. Quietly. Legally. And soon, permanently. Then something strange happened. A few days later, I saw a for sale sign outside their main clubhouse. Confused, I made a call. Turns out the HOA was in financial trouble. Big trouble. A few lawsuits, some unpaid assessments, and declining membership. I asked the broker how many lots were left. He said almost half had been abandoned or foreclosed. No one wanted to deal with them anymore. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just pushing back. I was watching the entire HOA unravel from the inside. I asked how much the common land was worth, the open green areas, the lakefront benches, the clubhouse itself. The number he gave me was lower than I expected. It wasn't cheap, but it was doable. With a few smart deals and a bit of patience, I could buy it all. And so, that became the new plan. Not just to own the land around them, but to own *them*. A week later, I got the call I was waiting for. The land deal went through. I officially owned the strip behind their road and that odd wedge behind their community garden. 2 small pieces of land, but they changed everything. I didn't tell anyone right away. I wanted to move in silence. I let the HOA enjoy their little victory, believing they'd pushed me out. They probably bragged about it at their next board meeting, sipping iced tea and patting themselves on the back. Meanwhile, I was drawing up plans. You see, I wasn't just trying to hold on to what was mine. That ship had sailed. Now, I was playing for something bigger. I met with a contractor and told him what I wanted. Private cabins. A gated entrance. A winding road that led right to the lake, bypassing their so-called private road completely. I wanted luxury without the HOA nonsense. And I wanted it fast. He looked at the land, the layout, the access, and nodded. You could build a quiet high-end getaway here. No one around to bother your guests. And the lake view. That's a goldmine. That's exactly what I thought. We started clearing the brush on the newly acquired lot the next day. No more hesitation. I was done being polite. And then, just 2 days into the project, guess who showed up? 3 HOA board members, again. Same SUV. Same smug faces. But this time, they didn't look so confident. They asked what I was doing on community land. I didn't answer. I walked over to the truck, pulled out my survey maps and the signed deed, and handed it to the one with the clipboard. He read it. Then read it again. No, he muttered. That can't be right. Oh, it's right, I said. I own this now. And that too. I pointed to the wedge near the back of their garden. And I'm not done buying. The woman with the walkie-talkie looked like she wanted to say something but stayed quiet. She probably realized they had no legal ground to stop me. Not this time. They tried to shift the conversation. Said I needed permits. Said I needed to follow community design standards. I reminded them this land wasn't under their HOA. Not anymore. I wasn't a member. Never signed a single covenant. Their rules didn't apply. They left without saying much. But I saw the worry on their faces. It was starting to sink in. I wasn't just building a cabin. I was building competition. The next few days were a blur of noise, chainsaws, bulldozers, fresh gravel, and surveyors measuring every inch. I set up temporary fences and brought in workers to dig out a fresh driveway. No more using their road. I was carving my own path now. By the end of the week, the first structure was framed, a sleek, modern cabin with a glass front that faced the lake. Not too big. Just enough to grab attention. And attention it grabbed. Cars slowed down. Neighbors walked by and stared. A few even crossed the line to ask what was being built. I told them it was a private resort. Quiet, peaceful, fully off-grid if guests wanted. Lake access, fire pits, hiking trails. And best of all, no HOA involved. You should have seen their eyes light up. A couple even whispered that they hated the HOA. Said they'd lost money dealing with all the fines and nonsense. One guy said he'd sell his property tomorrow if I made him an offer. That's when I knew I was onto something much bigger than I expected. This wasn't just revenge. This was a business. And with the HOA barely staying afloat, it was only a matter of time before they'd start selling off pieces. I just had to wait. Or maybe, I thought, I wouldn't wait at all. Maybe I'd make an offer they couldn't refuse. Because the funny thing about power is it shifts fast when you stop playing by their rules. Within 2 weeks, the second cabin was under construction. This one sat higher on the hill, overlooking both the lake and the HOA's so-called private park. I'd picked the design carefully, clean lines, tall windows, wood and stone finish that looked expensive but still felt wild. Everything about it said, *exclusive star. And people noticed. Every morning, I caught a new group of HOA residents walking slowly past the construction site. Some tried to act casual, like they were just stretching their legs. Others didn't even pretend, they stood there and stared, arms crossed, whispering back and forth. One guy even tried to take photos from behind a tree. I didn't stop him. Let them look. Let them wonder what I was doing and why I wasn't asking for their permission. Because by now, word had spread. The man they tried to evict. The one they thought they'd pushed out with a 30-minute ultimatum. He now owned 2 of the most valuable plots on the edge of their neighborhood. And he was building something they couldn't control. That's when the letters started. Folded notes left on my gate. Anonymous, of course. The usual nonsense, how my cabins were disturbing the character of the neighborhood, how I was inviting strangers, how I was bringing down property values. I laughed every time I read one. They didn't care about the neighborhood. They cared about losing control. But what they didn't know, I wasn't even close to being done. I went back to the real estate agent who sold me the first 2 plots. Asked him quietly if any more land near the HOA border was up for sale. He hesitated for a second, then leaned in and said, "There's one. It's tricky. Belongs to a guy who's behind on taxes. Used to be an orchard. Now just weeds." I told him I'd take it. Sight unseen. Less than 10 days later, I owned the third property, this time on the far side of their so-called recreation area. The old orchard. From that point, I had a direct line behind their tennis courts, their clubhouse, and their entire backside walking trail. It was like building a wall around them. They noticed. That weekend, I saw a small crowd gathered at their clubhouse. Some kind of emergency board meeting. The usual suspects were their clipboard guy, walkie-talkie lady, and a few others who always looked like they hated being outside. This time, they didn't come to me directly. They sent an official notice instead. Claimed my recent development activities were in violation of community harmony standards and requested an immediate halt. I scanned the paper. It was laughable. I didn't live within their HOA jurisdiction. My properties weren't subject to their covenants. Their authority ended at their border, and I had made sure of that. I posted the notice on a wooden pole next to my gate with a big red stamp across it, **rejected. That Monday, my lawyer sent them a formal response. Every claim, every demand, every line of their complaint was countered with legal precedent and property law. And when that didn't stop them, I added something else to my plan. A gravel parking lot. Right at the entrance of the orchard. With a wooden sign that said, **coming soon, Whisper Pines Private Retreat, Lakefront Cabins and Nature Lodges. Now booking 2025. I hadn't even built the third cabin yet. But that sign. It shook them. The next day, I saw something I never expected. One of the HOA board members, someone I hadn't seen before, walked up the trail to my property, knocked on the temporary office door, and asked to talk. He didn't come to threaten. He came to negotiate. Said some members were worried. That things were changing too fast. That maybe we could find some understanding. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at the cabins. The lake. The property lines that now wrapped around there's like a slow, tightening rope. Then I told him what I planned to do next. He didn't speak after that. He just nodded slowly, and walked away. The day the first guests arrived, I knew everything had changed. It wasn't some massive grand opening. No banners, no music. Just 3 couples who'd found Whisper Pines on a travel site I quietly launched. They pulled in with smiles and gear, backpacks, fishing poles, coolers, and looked around like they just stumbled into a secret paradise. And that's exactly what I wanted it to feel like. They checked into their cabins, lit small campfires by the lake, and didn't make a sound beyond laughter and soft music. No noise complaints. No shouting. No problems. But somehow, by the next morning, the HOA had found out. Again. This time, they showed up in full force. 5 board members. A clipboard. A new lawyer. Even someone with a drone. They stood outside my gate like they owned the road. One lady kept pointing toward the cabins, demanding to inspect them. Another guy asked to see my business license. I didn't open the gate. I didn't answer their questions. I just called the sheriff. When the deputy showed up 20 minutes later, I handed him all the paperwork, my business license, zoning permissions, property deeds. Everything was clean, filed, and legal. The HOA tried to argue, but the deputy shook his head. It's his land, he said. And from what I see, he's not breaking a single law. The board looked like they'd swallowed rocks. That afternoon, I walked the guests around the lake. Told them how this land used to be my family's for generations. How I grew up fishing in that lake, skipping stones across the surface, building tree houses in the tall pines. One of the couples stopped and said, "You can feel it. This place has heart." That comment stuck with me. I wasn't just building cabins anymore. I was reclaiming something that had always belonged to me. The guests left glowing reviews. Bookings doubled the next week. A small influencer found out and asked to film a stay. I said yes. Within days, I was flooded with requests. And every time someone booked a cabin, I added a little more to the resort. A fire pit area. Hammocks between the trees. Canoes by the shore. A gravel trail that led up to a wooden lookout tower with views across the entire lake. From that tower, you could even see into the HOA's backyard, neatly trimmed lawns, cookie-cutter homes, people walking tiny dogs in matching sweaters. It felt like watching another world. And from what I heard, that world wasn't doing so well. Turns out, some residents were fed up. Tired of fines, constant rules, and the rising HOA dues. Especially now that Whisper Pines was offering them a glimpse of freedom just over the hill. A couple families had already contacted me. Asked if I'd ever consider selling private plots within the resort. Off-grid, no HOA, just peace and land. It got me thinking. Maybe cabins weren't the end game. Maybe this place could grow into a full-blown off-grid community. Something different. Something better. And right when I started looking into that, the HOA made their next move. They tried to get the county to restrict short-term rentals near residential zones. Quietly, behind closed doors. They didn't mention me by name, but everyone knew what they were aiming at. Luckily, I'd already gotten ahead of them. I showed up at the town hall meeting with all my guests' signed waivers, insurance forms, business records, and a lawyer of my own. They didn't stand a chance. One by one, their arguments fell apart. Even the council members were skeptical. One leaned forward and said, "Let's be honest, this sounds more like a personal vendetta than a zoning issue." The HOA president turned red. Said nothing. After the meeting, one of the board members brushed past me outside and muttered, "You're ruining everything." I smiled and replied, "No. I'm just building something real." And it wasn't just the cabins anymore. It was something that couldn't be blocked, voted against, or pushed out with a fake notice. It was momentum. And once it starts rolling, no HOA rulebook in the world can stop it. By the time spring rolled around, Whisper Pines was fully booked 3 months in advance. Families, solo travelers, retired couples, people from all over were coming out to disconnect from the chaos of the world and reconnect with peace. My small, private retreat had taken on a life of its own. And the HOA? They were boiling. The more success I had, the more desperate they got. They tried every passive-aggressive move in the book. Someone reported me for excessive noise. Ironically, the loudest thing at Whisper Pines was the wind through the trees and the occasional loon call at dawn. Another time, one of their board members actually snuck onto my property and started measuring the space between my cabins and the tree line. He claimed I was violating a setback rule. I had to explain again that my land was not under their authority, and the only setback I had was watching grown adults act like jealous children. Still, I stayed calm. I didn't fight with them. I didn't retaliate. Instead, I improved. I paved the road leading into the resort. Added solar lighting and a welcome sign with carved wood lettering that read, "Whisper Pines, where silence speaks." Guests loved it. But then, the HOA took things to a whole new level. One afternoon, I got a call from a confused delivery driver who said the road to the resort had been blocked by a gate. When I arrived, I couldn't believe what I saw. A metal barrier, freshly welded, with a private road, no entry sign hanging from it. The HOA had literally tried to cut off my access road. I traced the barrier back and realized what they had done. They claimed a sliver of land, barely 6 feet wide, that stretched across the road as part of an old utility easement. Something from decades ago that hadn't been touched in years. They were using a loophole to choke me out. They figured if they couldn't control my land, they'd make it impossible for people to reach it. So, I called my surveyor. Then I called the county records office. What they didn't realize was that the road was actually part of a shared access agreement recorded way back when the whole area was still ranch land. That meant they couldn't legally block it. I took pictures. Gathered statements. Called my lawyer. 3 days later, we sent the HOA a cease and desist letter along with a copy of the easement agreement and a list of the county violations they'd triggered by installing that gate. But I didn't stop there. Instead of just getting the gate removed, I bought the tiny 6-foot-wide sliver they were trying to weaponize. Turns out the easement owner had no love for the HOA either. He sold it to me for less than the cost of the metal they used for the gate. And when I got the land transferred into my name, I made one small change. I turned the access road into a named street. *** Whisper Pines Way. ***. Now it showed up on GPS, on maps, and even on local signage. The HOA couldn't hide it anymore. Guests could find it with ease. And every time they saw that smooth stretch of road lined with pines, they'd know they were entering someplace intentional, not accidental. After that, the HOA went quiet for a while. No more letters. No more surprise visits. But I knew they weren't done. They still watched. Still whispered among themselves. Still held board meetings with my name on the agenda. I didn't care. Because now I had the upper hand in every way. My bookings were steady. My reviews were glowing. My cabins were thriving. And the best part? I had plans to expand. Not just more cabins, but a garden, a meditation deck, even a treehouse platform for sunrise yoga. People were asking for these things, and I was ready to give it to them. I wasn't just reacting to the HOA anymore. I was building forward, with vision. And for every obstacle they threw in my path, I found a way to turn it into a stepping stone. They tried to block my cabin. Now I owned the road. They gave me 30 minutes to leave. I gave myself a future. Word had started to spread beyond just the travel blogs and influencer reels. A small local newspaper did a feature on hidden luxury getaways, and right there in the middle of the list was Whisper Pines. They talked about the privacy, the natural beauty, and how the entire resort had been built in peaceful defiance of the HOA next door. Peaceful defiance. I liked that. But the HOA didn't. A week after that article came out, I noticed someone driving slowly past the property. It wasn't one of the usual residents. I knew most of their cars by now. This was a black SUV with tinted windows, the kind of vehicle you associate with someone scoping out a place before they make a move. Sure enough, 2 days later I got served. The HOA was suing me. Their claim? That I was damaging neighborhood property values and operating a business that disrupted community harmony. They even threw in a line about how my guests could be a potential safety risk. No evidence. Just assumptions. They wanted the resort shut down. Immediately. Most people would panic. That's what they were counting on. Instead, I met them in court. I walked in with a binder thicker than a phone book. Every permit. Every tax record. Guest testimonials. Copies of zoning laws. Photos of my property before and after development. Even a few letters from nearby residents outside the HOA who thanked me for bringing responsible tourism and boosting the local economy. Their lawyer barely made it 10 minutes before the judge cut him off. "This property is fully compliant," he said. "This seems more personal than legal." And just like that, case dismissed. But I wasn't done. After court, I approached the judge off the record and asked him a question I'd been thinking about for months. What would it take for me to create my own HOA? He raised an eyebrow but gave me the information I needed. Turns out, if I expanded the property just a bit more and got the right approvals, I could form my own private community. One with no insane rules. No power-hungry board. Just fairness and freedom. So that night, I made an offer on the adjacent parcel of land, 20 acres of untouched forest, right next to the Whisper Pines trailhead. It was owned by an old couple who'd been wanting to sell for years but didn't trust the HOA to develop it right. They trusted me. The deal closed in less than a month. And with that, Whisper Pines doubled in size. That's when things really started moving. I hired a designer to map out the new section. Tiny homes. Hiking paths. A community garden. Solar-powered utility sheds. Everything built with the environment in mind, using local materials and sustainable practices. And all of it under a brand new HOA, if you could even call it that. No lawn fines. No mailbox rules. Just a few shared values: respect nature, respect your neighbors, and respect your space. Word spread faster than I could have imagined. Within weeks, I had 10 families interested in building. Not renters, owners. People who wanted to live quietly, simply, and without someone measuring their grass height every Thursday. And the original HOA? They were losing their minds. They sent more letters, tried to organize protests, even called the local news claiming I was turning the area into a chaotic wilderness camp. But when a reporter came out to investigate, all they found was a peaceful retreat, clean walking trails, smiling guests, and cabins that blended so perfectly into the woods they almost disappeared. The article they published the next week had a headline that said it all. *** Nature wins, the cabin that became a movement. ***. And that's exactly what was happening. Whisper Pines wasn't just surviving anymore. It was growing into something bigger. Something real. A place where people could breathe again. Where no one knocked on your door with a clipboard and a petty complaint. I had started with a simple cabin in the woods. They gave me 30 minutes to get out. Now people were lining up to get in.